If you want real, noticeable, meaningful change in your mental health and your physical health, you have to make real, meaningful changes to your diet. You can't just sprinkle superfoods on top or nibble at it around the edges by taking some of the sugary things out. You have to fundamentally restructure your diet from the ground up in ways that make biological sense. And this is not the dietary patterns that most people hear about.
Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you're having a good week so far. My name is Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, and this is my podcast, Feel Better, Live More. More and more people are becoming aware that what they eat has a profound impact on their brain health and their moods. But do you know exactly what foods you should be trying to avoid and what foods you should try and include? Or are you getting increasingly confused with the tsunami of dietary information out there and the conflicting advice from experts? One of the reasons I believe that there is so much confusion about food is because of the widely held belief that there is one perfect human diet that will work well for everyone. But as you may have heard me say before, or you might have read in one of my 5 books, I simply do not believe that to be the case. However, I do think that there are some core dietary principles that hold true for everyone, the most important one being that we should aim as much as possible to cut out ultra-processed foods and introduce as many whole foods as we can. But once we get to that place, I have seen that there are a variety of different approaches that can work. In fact, the most appropriate diet for you will also depend on your goals, your age, and your current state of health. Now, in today's conversation, I speak to someone who has been a psychiatrist for more than 25 years and who for many years felt that her impact on patients was limited until she learned about the incredible healing power of food. Dr. Georgia Ede is a Harvard-trained, board-certified psychiatrist specializing in nutritional and metabolic psychiatry. Her 25 years of clinical experience include 12 years at Smith College and Harvard University Health Services, where she was the first person to offer students nutrition-based approaches as an alternative to psychiatric medication. She also co-authored the first inpatient study of the ketogenic diet for treatment-resistant mental illness, and is the author of the wonderful new book, Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, a powerful plan to improve moods, overcome anxiety, and protect memory for a lifetime of optimal mental health. In our fascinating conversation, Georgia explains that almost unknowingly, many of us have been feeding our brains improperly for our entire lives. She also explains what she considers to be the 5 foods that have the most potential to be problematic for our brain health, and how quickly we can start to feel the benefits if we're able to cut back on them. And this highlights a key point that both Georgia and I are extremely passionate about, but one that is probably not spoken about enough. That for most of us, in the modern day food environment, what we cut out of our diet is more important than what we put in. We also talk about the relationship between blood glucose and brain glucose, the whole foods that Georgia believes can be problematic, especially if we are having problems with our moods or have an actual mental health diagnosis. We discuss why Georgia believes that the Mediterranean diet, whilst better than the standard Western diet, is not optimal. And we also cover Georgia's clinical research about the potential benefits of ketogenic diets in treating mental health problems, something I had previously discussed with another Harvard psychiatrist, Dr. Chris Palmer, back on episode 396 of this podcast. Georgia is clearly a wonderful physician who cares deeply about her patients and is helping many of them gain relief and sometimes remission from long-standing mental health problems. That being said, there is no question that some of her recommendations may, at first glance, appear to be unorthodox and, dare I say it, controversial. Throughout the conversation, I have tried my best to provide clarity and make sure that you clearly understand why Georgia is recommending the changes that she is. But as you are listening, please do remember that there is no one dietary approach that is going to work for everyone at every stage in their life. I wanted to start off with something potentially provocative in the introduction of your new book for many people, which is this. You write, most of us have been feeding our brains improperly our entire lives. Therefore, we have no idea how much better we can feel and how much more we can expect of ourselves if we eat right.
This is true. I mean, it's really because we've been fed the wrong information about what a brain-healthy diet should look like for really generations. And so if you give the brain what it needs, you can expect a lot more from it.
Yeah. What is it that the brain needs that we're not giving it?
Well, we've been told for a really long time that the way to protect the brain from damage and to nourish it is by adding special things to our diet, brain superfoods, supplements, nutraceuticals, things like that. And really, what's missing in that message is that what the brain actually needs is no different from what the rest of the body actually needs. It needs nutrients. It needs all essential nutrients. So you need to nourish the brain. Mm-hmm. You need to protect the brain from damaging ingredients. Really, protection of the brain is not about adding special things to the diet or special foods to the diet. It's about subtracting things from the diet that are damaging the brain. And then the brain needs to be energized properly with the right types of fuel. Mm. If you give the brain what it needs, the right nutrients, and you remove the things that can damage the brain from the diet, and you energize it properly, and you understand how to energize it properly, and then you stand out of the way, the brain will, evolutionary biology will do the rest. And you can just trust your body and your brain to work properly if you give them what they need and nothing more.
Yeah. It's fascinating. What's interesting to me as I read through your work, Georgia, is that you've been a psychiatrist now for several decades.
25 years.
And in your new book, you describe yourself as an accidental nutritionist. It's quite an interesting term, that.
Well, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, we didn't talk about food in the brain once in all of that time. And really, nutrition in general, 4 years of medical school, we had maybe 2 or 3 hours worth of nutrition education, and most of what we learned was incorrect. So I really never thought about the connection between food and the brain. It really didn't cross my mind. And so I practiced for 10 years without understanding how important it is to feed the brain properly if you want to have good mental health. And it really wasn't, and I know a lot of us have a similar story, and a lot of us physicians who accidentally stumble into nutrition, we have to accidentally stumble into it and research it ourselves because we're not taught about nutrition and how fundamentally important it is. So it was through my own health challenges that I started instinctively, experimenting with my diet to try to figure out if I could help myself, because conventional medicine wasn't able to help me with some of the things I was coming up against. And when I started diving into nutrition, not only did I discover relatively quickly that most of what we're led to believe about nutrition is wrong, I also fell in love with nutrition science, and food is fascinating, and brain metabolism is fascinating and complex and interesting. When I went to medical school, I sort of thought of nutrition as less than, it's really kind of beneath the doctor. Physicians, really the hallmark of a real doctor is prescribing medications and doing procedures. But understanding how the body and brain work, it's just absolutely fascinating. And so one of the things I tried to do in the book was share some of that fascination, some of those really interesting pathways and how foods work in the body and what's inside food and all of that, those pieces of information that I fell in love with when I started studying nutrition. I try to share some of that with readers as well.
Yeah, I think you've done a fantastic job in your book. And as I just mentioned to you in my kitchen, one of the things I love about your work and your book is that there's a real compassionate tone behind everything you are writing about, everything you are talking about. And to me, it really speaks to an idea that I'm so passionate about. You are a real life clinician, okay? You see patients who are struggling. You knew that the tools that you had available to you in the past were suboptimal, to say the least, right? And so you've had to figure out other ways of helping your patients if you're truly going to help them in the way that you want to as a doctor. And I find sometimes a lot of the commentary around health is often done from people sitting on the sidelines. In theory, we think this is the way you should do things. Sure, look at the science, see what it says. But unless you are someone who actually sees patients, I think you're missing out on what it's truly like when you're one-on-one with a patient. They've been struggling for years. You can see the pain in their eyes, and you have to figure out, how can I help this person? And that's why I love your book so much, is because it's written, I think, from that mindset, from that perspective, that there are lots of people who are struggling with suboptimal brain health. I mean, you mentioned at the start in your introduction, over 1 billion people around the world have a mental health diagnosis. And at the end of that session, you write that psychiatric problems of all kinds are becoming so commonplace that we're beginning to think of poor mental health as normal and inevitable. I mean, what's going on, Georgia?
You know, it's heartbreaking, right? So it's heartbreaking on a grand scale to think that, our public mental health is deteriorating, but it's heartbreaking as you said, as a clinician, you're dealing with one person at a time, hearing their story, feeling their suffering. And in so many cases, really the reason I wrote the book is because changing your diet can be a powerful mental health intervention. It can help people in ways no medicine can, but you have to know which dietary changes are the right ones to make, are the ones that are worth making. And they're not the ones we're used to hearing about. So it's heartbreaking for me to hear people say, well, I've already tried, so I've tried changing my diet. I've tried, I've tried a Mediterranean diet, or I've tried eating more superfoods, or I've cut out sugar, or whatever it is they've tried to do. They think that they've tried everything already, and they've tried sometimes 12, 13, 14, 15 medications. They've been in and out of the hospital. They've tried psychotherapy for years, and nothing's worked. And so people lose hope. And the thing that I think is so important for people to know is that they haven't tried everything yet, because the dietary strategies that really make the most biological sense and have the most metabolic and biochemical power are not the ones we're used to hearing about. Yeah. The interventions that we're talking about, they can help people feel better in days to weeks. Even people with very serious so-called treatment-resistant mental illnesses. And so that's why I think it's so important to share this information, because it is different, but we need a different strategy. You were saying, how hard it is to be a clinician and be listening to people who are suffering and telling their stories, that years or sometimes decades of pain, emotional pain. It's really difficult to hear those kinds of stories. And, really as a doctor, I was watching, like all of my colleagues, my practice was filling up with people who just weren't getting that much better, no matter what I did, no matter how many medicines I tried or how much psychotherapy I offered support. I had kind of run out of ideas for some of my patients. And I think if we're really being honest with each other, especially in psychiatry, I mean, lots of fields of medicine, but especially in psychiatry, the tools we have at our disposal in traditional psychiatry are really limited.
Yeah. We're going to get into all the dietary strategies that you recommend, those that you have seen work with people with quite intractable mental health problems as well, okay? Before we get into that though, I'd love you to outline what you think are the most harmful foods in the modern food environment that are causing so much damage.
Yeah, when people say, what are the what are the foods that are most worth avoiding. I think it's probably no surprise especially to your listeners, because you've really done a wonderful job of educating the public about this. Of course, the refined carbohydrates, sugars, flours, cereal products, high amounts of fruit juice, that sort of thing. These sort of naked carbohydrates. Vegetable oils, which are factory fats, refined fats from seeds, things like soybean oil and cottonseed oil and grapeseed oil and canola oil. And so those are really the two signature ingredients of the so-called standard American diet, which we've now exported around the world, or we'll call the SAD diet. We'll call the SAD diet. Those are the signature ingredients of the SAD diet that make it so damaging. But then there's also alcohol, which we often don't talk a lot about, but which is just as damaging as those ingredients. And then there are a couple of whole foods, which I think are really worth people avoiding if they can. And this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, but they are the grains and the legumes. And I explain why in the book, why these foods are more risk than benefit. And so I would say those 5 things, if people removed those 5 things from their diet or avoided them as much as they can, I think they would be really doing themselves a great service.
So let's go into these foods, right? Let's start with the most widely accepted, and then let's start moving towards the ones which perhaps are a bit more controversial, okay? Mm-hmm. Refined carbohydrates, that's one category you mentioned that you would like us to think about cutting out. Why?
Because refined carbohydrates are essentially, they're naked carbohydrates. They turn instantly into glucose in the bloodstream. So when you eat a piece of fruit or a starchy vegetable that contains carbohydrate, it's not a naked carbohydrate. That carbohydrate exists in a fiber matrix. It's got water. It's got nutrients. It digests more slowly but you actually have to digest that food. And so it causes a sort of more natural rise in blood sugar that you're evolutionarily designed to handle. When you take in pre-processed carbohydrates, I mean, we're supposed to process these carbohydrates ourselves. But if you eat a processed carbohydrate or a refined carbohydrate, a sugar, a syrup, a crystal, a liquid, a powder, these are naked carbohydrates like flours and sugars. These turn instantly into glucose in the bloodstream. It's so fast because they don't need to be digested. They're pre-digested for you. You get an unnatural steep spike in glucose, kind of a tsunami of glucose molecules coming into the bloodstream that we're just not evolutionarily designed to handle. So, and then every time you get one of these spikes in glucose, it's a spike to an unnaturally high level. You also get a spike of insulin to follow. So first of all, high blood sugar, even if it's just a brief spike after a meal, that's toxic. Too much glucose is really important and healthy, and we need blood sugar. Lots of cells burn glucose. Glucose is not bad. Carbohydrates are not bad. Cells need them. But you can have too much of a good thing. So when there's too much glucose in the bloodstream, that extra glucose literally sticks. It sticks to proteins and DNA and fats and all kinds of important molecules in your bloodstream. So for example, and does damage. So
that doesn't sound good, does it?
That's not
I just want
good.
people to really hear what you said there, which is this excess glucose sticks to all these important molecules and substances in your body.
Yes.
It's not a good thing.
No, we become essentially caramelized from the inside out, right? So when this extra glucose sticks to these important cell components, it kind of cripples and disfigures those molecules into what are called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. And AGEs is a great acronym for them because they are one of the main drivers of premature aging of various tissues in the body, including the brain. The other thing that the glucose spike will do is it's going to trigger an insulin spike. And the insulin spike is going to turn off fat burning. When your insulin levels are too high, you cannot burn fat. So your body doesn't even know it's there to be burned for energy. So when your insulin levels are running, if you're eating too many of the wrong carbohydrates too often, your glucose levels are going to run too high. Therefore, your insulin levels, the insulin is a hormone that does many, many things, but one of the things it does is it helps cope with and process all of that glucose, the incoming glucose molecules. When insulin is high, fat burning turns off. And so you cannot burn fat. You could have hundreds of pounds of fat on your body, which is essentially just stored energy. Yeah. You could have hundreds of pounds of body in your fat and not be able to lose it because your insulin levels are running too high. So, and the other thing is that whenever you get this glucose spike, high glucose, when glucose levels are running too high, neurons slow down. They don't fire as quickly. Your brain and your nervous system is more sluggish. You can't think as quickly. You might experience brain fog. You might feel depressed. You might not have good energy, mental clarity, or mental stamina. And so everything is kind of taking a hit. People with type 2 diabetes, that's a disease of chronically high blood sugar levels. That's kind of your later stage, which can happen for a lot of people. We all know very well that people type 2 diabetes, which is a blood sugar disease, it damages every organ system in the body, to the point that people lose limbs, people have to go on dialysis, and people have heart attacks and strokes. And they go blind. So it damages from head to toe. And so that doesn't happen overnight. So keeping your glucose levels in a healthy range is one of the fundamental principles of good metabolic and good physical and good mental health, is just paying attention to your glucose levels, which we can now measure at home ourselves if we wish.
Yeah, there's so much there. This idea of a sluggish nervous system, this idea that when your blood glucose is running high, which frankly is most of the population these days in many countries, particularly the UK and the US, certainly for sure. I thought that was interesting. I'd like to explain why it is that the neurons fire more slowly, these nerve cells fire more slowly, because again, trying to make this relevant to everyone, well, sure, 1 billion people around the world have a mental health diagnosis of some sort, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that means 6 or 7 billion people don't. But it doesn't mean those 6 or 7 billion people are in fantastic health.
Right.
Many people have irritability, brain fog, sluggishness, inability to focus, right? And you're directly saying that some of that may be due to high blood glucose levels. So what happens when we have high blood glucose? How does that affect our nerve cells in our brain?
Yeah, so every time you get a blood sugar spike in your general circulation, every time your blood sugar spikes, your brain sugar will also spike. So they rise and fall together.
Okay.
So something really interesting about brain metabolism is that yes, the brain needs some glucose at all times, and so the brain doesn't really filter. It doesn't really put up any barriers to allowing glucose inside. It really needs the glucose to come in. So, but it doesn't allow all of it in. So what it does is it keeps your brain glucose about 80% lower than your blood glucose. So they rise and fall together. They're not identical. They're not the same. It's supposed to be. The brain glucose is supposed to be much lower. But it doesn't have an ability to put a cap on it. So if your blood glucose is too high, your brain glucose will also be too high. They rise and fall together. The higher the blood sugar, the higher the brain sugar. And when you've got too much glucose in the brain, not only will that glucose stick to all kinds of important things inside the brain, but it will also, when you get these advanced glycation end products, or these AGEs, these caramelized clusters piling up inside your brain, those can cause a lot of problems with brain cell signaling. They can really kind of gum up the works. But the brain has an immune system that's always, kind of on surveillance and patrolling the area and looking for problems. And when it sees these caramelized clusters, it mounts on purpose an immune response. It deliberately creates it releases inflammatory cytokines to deliberately create inflammation and oxygen-free radicals to deliberately create oxidative stress. These are normal, healthy reactions to any kind of threat inside the brain or body. It's like the immune system's first responder system. So now, then this is sound the alarm and clear away these clusters. But then there's supposed to be a healing phase that takes place that returns the neighborhood to peaceful serenity and all is well again. But most people, if they're eating sort of the SAD diet, the way most people eat, they're getting these glucose spikes inside the brain 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. So this process of inflammation and oxidative stress, which we now know are some of the main drivers of mental health conditions of all kinds and physical as well, instead of this temporary, targeted, controlled, healthy inflammatory response and oxidative stress response, you have now chronic, uncontrolled inflammation and oxidative stress inside the brain. And when you've got too much inflammation and oxidative stress inside the brain, the brain is kind of in this crisis state all the time. And that can destabilize your neurotransmitter systems, it destabilizes your hormone systems, and it causes physical damage to everything inside the brain, including the brain's learning and memory center, the hippocampus, the blood-brain barrier, which is supposed to protect your brain from risky molecules that might be in the general circulation. But as dire as that sounds, it's very easy to turn this around by simply protecting yourself from these ingredients by removing them from your diet.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it like that, it really makes you stop and reflect a minute. And I think it also highlights, I think one of the major issues around talking about food these days, Georgia, I'd be very interested in your perspective on this. But if we think about how we have eaten for most of our evolution, it is so different to how we eat today. So when people even suggest going 10, 15% back towards how we have always eaten, it sounds extreme, but it only sounds extreme relative to the norm of today. And the norm of today is that much of the population is sick and is functioning suboptimally. So I think this is one of the challenges when it comes to talking about food these days, because many people with their busy lives, they're rushing around, families, everyone's working and struggling to make ends meet, and they always feel they've got too many things to do. Then it can sound as though, oh, wow, now I need to overhaul my diet as well. Yeah. And it can feel really difficult for people, but it's just our evolutionary norm.
Right.
And I think that point doesn't get highlighted enough.
It's such a great point because the diet we think of as normal is anything but. And the diet that, those of us who have thought a lot about this and studied this for ourselves, physicians who have studied this ourselves, we can see how we understand how we're supposed to eat and how most of us eat, how different that is. And so we're facing a lot of obstacles here. And so one is the kind of toxic food environment that we live in. So we're surrounded by things that we're never designed to handle. But we're also dealing with these ultra processed foods, which are designed to be addictive and irresistible, and they're convenient, and they're everywhere. They're cheap for whatever reason, and so we are. It's a really an uphill battle for people. It's difficult. Not only are we raised on these processed foods, but they're really hard to stop eating. So I know what this is like myself. So I have a lot of compassion for people in this situation, but I also want to say that there's a lot of hope here because it doesn't take long. It doesn't take long to experiment with your diet and see real results. If you know which changes to make, like you were saying before, you can feel better really quickly, and that is going to be your motivation. Most people they've made the types of changes to their diet that they don't really help that much. Yeah. And, I remember seeing you on TV going into people's kitchens and pantries and just taking out the bad things. Yeah. Just take out the bad ingredients. There's so much power in subtraction. I know, as human beings, we believe in the power of addition. It's really appealing to think that all you need to do to improve your health is, sprinkle some superfoods on top of your diet. Eat more dark chocolate, drink more red wine, whatever it is that appeals to you as a message. Or even just more superfoods, right? So more colorful plant foods. That's, first of all, it's easy to do, and it feels positive and proactive and empowering. But those strategies don't work. There's absolutely no evidence that those strategies work. The power is in subtraction, taking away the foods that are causing the inflammation and oxidative stress and insulin resistance in the first place, and that are destabilizing your hormone patterns and destabilizing your neurotransmitters and your brain chemistry in the first place. When you take those things, it's kind of a first do no harm strategy.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, Georgia. Okay, so let's really bring it to life. Vivo Barefoot are one of the sponsors of today's show. Now, I am a huge fan of Vivo Barefoot shoes and have been wearing them for over a decade now, well before they started supporting this podcast. I've also been recommending them to patients for years because I've seen so many benefits. I've seen improvements in back pain, hip pain, knee pain, foot pain, and even things like plantar fasciitis. And contrary to what you might initially think, most people find Vivos really, really comfortable. And I have to say, especially at this time of year, as the temperature is starting to drop, their winter boots are absolutely fantastic. And I myself am really enjoying wearing their brand new Gobi warm-lined winter boots. Now, as well as adults, I think they are a fantastic option for children. And I really hope that in the future, more and more children start wearing barefoot shoes like Vivos, as I think this can prevent many downstream problems in the body later on in life. And remember, whether for your children or yourself, if you've never tried Vivos before, it's completely risk-free to do so, as they offer a 100-day trial for new customers. So if you're not happy, you just send them back for a full refund. If you go to vivobarefoot.com/livemore, they are giving 20% off as a one-time code to all of my podcast listeners. Terms and conditions do apply. To get your 20% off code, all you have to do is go to vivobarefoot.com/livemore. Today's bite-sized episode is sponsored by AG1, one of the most nutrient-dense whole food supplements that I've come across, and I myself have been drinking it regularly for over 5 years. It contains vitamins, minerals, probiotics, prebiotics, digestive enzymes, and so much more, and can help with energy, focus, gut health, digestion, and support a healthy immune system. For the month of April only, AG1 are offering a free morning person hat, bottle of vitamin D, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription. Just go to drinkag1.com/livemore to unlock this exclusive offer and get started on your journey to better health today. People have heard before that adding certain foods, certain superfoods, have got all these kind of incredible benefits. But let's just think about it through the lens of what you just said, right? So let's say, as much of the population does, you're starting your day with a sugary bowl of cereal. Okay. This is very, very common. And most of the listeners to this show, of course, we're getting new ones all the time, so I always feel I have to reiterate this, but a lot of people don't realize what it's doing to their blood glucose levels and how it's setting them off on a blood sugar roller coaster, which they're trying to catch up on and chase for the rest of the day.
Yes.
Right. So they then hear something or read something online about blueberries being this really good for my brain health. Okay. So I go, okay, I'm going to have my cereal and add in blueberries for all their benefits.
Yes.
Now, you say that doesn't work because the blueberries are not going to undo the big blood sugar spike from your cereal. So maybe the blueberries have got some benefits, and, they do, right? Or we can discuss whether you think they do or not. But but is it enough to undo the metabolic damage that has been, unleashed on your system from the sugary cereal?
If you want real, noticeable, meaningful change in your mental health and your physical health, you have to make real, meaningful changes to your diet. You can't just sprinkle superfoods on top or nibble at it around the edges by taking some of the sugary things out or whatever it is. You have to fundamentally restructure your diet from the ground up in ways that make biological sense. And these are not the dietary patterns that most people hear about. So when you fundamentally restructure your diet from the ground up, that's where you've got the real power. It doesn't work for everybody. And I think you've said this as well. Of course, nothing works for everybody. But this works for most people in terms of improving how they feel very quickly. And in many cases, allowing people to use less or even no psychiatric medication.
Yeah.
And so if that's what you want for yourself, you can't just sprinkle things on top or nibble at it around the edges. You have to understand, kind of reteach yourself what food rules actually work. What are foods in the first place? Which foods do you need? Which foods do you avoid? And just try it for a few weeks and see how you feel. Everybody's got 6 weeks, right, to try something new. What do you've got to lose?
I think you highlighted a very important point. And whilst your book is primarily focused on foods, you also acknowledge that you're not anti-medication.
No.
Physical activity is important.
Yes.
Dealing with trauma is important.
Yes.
Relationships are important. Sleep, stress management.
Yes.
And it may be that changing each one of them is going to improve things by a certain percentage.
Right.
Right? And I don't know if you said this in the book. I think you did. Or certainly you said it in an interview I heard, where you said medications do not work for most people, and they certainly do not get to the root cause.
No.
And that's for psychiatric problems you're talking about.
Yeah, in psychiatry, when you think about some of our more common chronic health tragedies, things like obesity and type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, we do have medicines now that are more effective at dealing with those issues. They're still not my favorite way of doing it, but we do have medications which can help people lose weight, that can bring their blood sugar into a normal range. We don't have medications in psychiatry that do a very good job. I mean, we do. Psychiatric medicines are really important. I still use them in my practice, and especially in acute situations or in situations where people can't change their diet or aren't able to, or aren't interested in changing their diet, or in cases where a mental health condition isn't related to diet. We still need medications as tools, as physicians. But if we're being honest with ourselves, and if we look at the data, psychiatric medications fail most people. They don't bring enough meaningful relief to enough people. And the price that people pay for the relief that they may get is often tremendous metabolic dysfunction and shortening of their life by many years. Obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease.
Do you mean as a side effect from the medication?
Yes, exactly. So a lot of our most effective psychiatric medications are the so-called antipsychotic medications, which are now prescribed for all kinds of things, not just serious mental illness. They're prescribed not just for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, but also for depression, insomnia, anxiety, irritability, mood swings, agitation, all kinds of things, because most other medicines are not very effective. But these medicines cause blood sugar levels and insulin levels to rise within minutes to hours of the first dose.
Wow.
And they triple the risk for type 2 diabetes. So these medicines are yes, they can bring benefit, and yes, we need them.
But there's a cost.
But there's a cost.
Yeah. Back to these foods then that you feel are causing the most harm. Okay, refined carbohydrates. You mentioned how they raise our blood glucose. That then raises the amount of glucose in our brain. And if that is done continuously, as it is for many of us, that can cause these advanced glycation end products. It can start to age us, and it starts to slow down the functioning of our brain. Okay, so I know there's many more things you could say about refined carbs, but that's, I think, a pretty powerful case as to why we should reduce the amount of refined carbs in our diet.
Yeah.
Let's move on now to your second category, refined oils. Could you explain what refined oils are first? Because I'm not sure everyone is totally familiar with that term.
Yeah, we've been trained to divide fats into two categories for a long time: saturated and unsaturated. Well, All foods, whether animal or plant, contain a mixture of saturated and unsaturated fats. It makes no sense to demonize one and glorify the other. I want to teach people to to put fats into two completely different categories. Forget the saturated versus unsaturated. Those can both be healthy and good for you if they're in a whole food, right? I want to teach people to distinguish between whole, natural, healthy fats, meaning unprocessed fats that are found naturally in plant and animal foods, and factory fats, refined fats that they may come from a whole food. So, for example, sunflower seeds, safflower seeds, soybeans. These are basically all different types of seeds. And if you can imagine a bowl of soybeans sitting on your kitchen counter and trying to turn those into oil at home in your kitchen, how in the world would you do that? It requires a factory processing. And to wrangle the oil out of those seeds requires 15 steps, including high pressure heat and explosive solvents and all kinds of other steps in order to purify the oil from those seeds. There is nothing natural about soybean oil. And one of the problems with these so-called vegetable oils, which are actually refined seed oils, they're factory-made, they're oils that are extracted from seeds using industrial processing. These oils, which are called vegetable oils, one of the problems with them is that they are exceedingly unnaturally high in a particular type of fatty acid. It's an omega-6 fatty acid called linoleic acid. And linoleic acid naturally exists in the world. It naturally exists in seeds and even in animal foods, but very, very small percentages. So we're designed to handle a certain amount. We're designed to see a small percentage of linoleic acid in our diets. We are not designed to buy bottles of it and pour it over everything we eat or cook with it. And so, the amount of linoleic acid in our diets is something like 3 to 6 times what it used to be. So, it's you can see it when they do fat biopsies. You can see that the amount of linoleic acid in our body fat has been steadily rising for decades.
It's a very similar principle, isn't it, to what you said about refined carbs, which is carbohydrates are not inherently bad if you have them from a whole food.
Yes,
they come wrapped up in fiber.
Right.
So you have to work to digest it. The blood glucose spike is much flatter than if you have it naked.
Yes.
Right? And you're kind of saying the same thing here about refined oils.
Yes.
If you're having that oil, that linoleic acid, as part of whole foods, it's in a smaller amount. Your body is adapted to tolerate that. But when you artificially extract it, put it in a very concentrated form and then pour it on everything that you're eating, everything you're cooking, you're pouring that over it, let's say, or certainly the ultra-processed food products that we're buying have got that in it, then you're getting much more than we are adapted to use. Same principle?
Exactly. And this is the beauty of whole foods principles, is that if, for hundreds of thousands, 2 million years, all we really had available to us was whole plant and animal foods. We hunt and gather, we ate animals and plants. And we figured out through trial and error which ones were safe and which ones weren't safe to eat. And so lots and lots of evolutionary wisdom there. And now what we've got is, factories that, yes, this is the slippery slope for people. I think it's hard sometimes for people to figure out what's going on because, yes, these oils come from plants. But they don't. But that doesn't make them natural or healthy. When you extract molecules and concentrate them from any food, whether it's a protein powder or a vegetable oil or sugar or a syrup from a fruit or a starchy vegetable or a grain, those ingredients may come from whole foods and they may be natural in a certain sense, but they no longer behave naturally in the human body. We did not evolve to see naked carbohydrates and factory concentrated fats. We don't have, our systems can't handle those things.
So you explained clearly what these refined carbohydrates do to our brain. What do these refined oils do to our brain?
So this is a very new area of scientific exploration. We don't know very much about this yet. But I researched this for the book because I wanted to bring people up to speed about where the science is right now. And so one of the things I came across, which I thought was the most concerning, is that I wanted to know whether or not linoleic acid, this omega-3 fatty acid, whether it crossed into the brain and what happened to it in the brain. There are lots of people starting to look at what happens in the rest of the body, and there's, potentially a lot of concern there as well. But as a psychiatrist, I want to see what happens in the brain. And it turns out that what we're learning is that linoleic acid, the brain absorbs linoleic acid quite well. But then after it crosses into the brain seems to not really quite know what to do with it. And so actually what it ends up doing with it is it burns most of it for energy. That's not good.
Okay. We need to understand why it's not good, because we want the brain to generate energy,
yes,
right? And you explain in the book, and maybe we'll get to it today, that we can either do that from glucose and or fat in the form of ketones. Is that right?
Right. The brain prefers to burn small molecules for energy, either glucose or ketone. Usually a mixture of both is what it likes.
So ketones and glucose.
It's a hybrid engine that can burn glucose and or ketones. Yeah.
Okay. So now you're throwing in linoleic acid, and you're saying that that's a problem if the energy burns that to make energy. Why? So
ketones, they're tiny little fragments of fat. So fat tends to be a long molecule. The types of fats in our foods tend to be quite long, 18, 20, 22, 24 carbons long chains. And then we kind of chop them up for energy, and we burn them for energy. Many cells throughout the body can and do burn these longer fatty acids for energy, but the brain is different. The brain doesn't really have the time to chop up a long molecule into little pieces. And so it prefers kind of pre-digested fats in the form of ketones, which are very small, very small molecules. So they're little fragments of fat that cross easily into the brain and can be burned for energy. Linoleic acid is a very long molecule. So when the brain burns it for energy, it creates a lot more inflammation and oxidative stress. And the brain isn't really equipped to deal with a lot of oxidative stress. It's too busy doing other things. It doesn't really have the machinery to deal with lots of these oxygen-free radicals that get generated naturally in the process of turning fuel into energy. Whenever you're burning anything for energy, any kind of fuel, there is naturally some inflammation and oxidative stress that comes along with that. But the brain is not designed to burn long molecules because those will, you'll still get energy out of it, but you'll also get a lot more oxidative stress.
Yeah. It's so fascinating when you think about that. And do you know then, or are we assuming that ancestral populations, because the amount of linoleic acid in their diets was so much lower than it is today for many of us, stroke most of us, that less linoleic acid was going into their brains?
For sure, there was less linoleic acid going into their brains, for sure, because the diets that we used to consume a long time ago, they were just relatively low in linoleic acid. It would have been impossible to. There wouldn't have been any sources of concentrated linoleic acid in the ancestral diet.
Yeah.
So we're absolutely absorbing a lot more now than we ever did before.
The whole issue around vegetable oils has become quite a hot potato in the health world, hasn't it? Not everyone agrees that they are problematic.
Right.
Now, my own view is that whenever you look at the precautionary principle, or wherever I think this is pretty helpful in diet, full stop, to go, what have we eaten for most of our evolution? If we haven't, let's just be a little bit careful about bringing large amounts of that into our diet. I think that kind of makes sense to most people. Before we move on from refined oils, what would critics of your work say? Do you think about refined oils?
What have they said?
Okay, what have they said? Stroke, what would they say? Because the vegetable oil thing is controversial. Not everyone necessarily agrees with that.
Correct. So There are two main lines of argument when people want to recommend continuing to eat the vegetable oils. One is that linoleic is viewed as an essential fatty acid.
Okay.
So, but I actually disagree with that, and I explain why in the book. The only reason that we would theoretically need to eat linoleic acid is to make arachidonic acid, which is the actual omega-6 fatty acid that we need in our bodies. But arachidonic acid is available from animal fats, so you don't need to eat any linoleic acid if you're including some animal fat in the diet. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is that, well, vegetable oil it's heart healthy. It has no cholesterol. It has no saturated fat. Polyunsaturated fats are good for you. Saturated fats are bad for you. Vegetable fats are good for you. Animal fats are bad for you. And this line of reasoning, it's really confusing for people, because when you talk to people who recommend a whole foods plant-based diet, there are a lot of good things about a whole food plant-based diet, and I talk about this in the book. But all the benefits that have ever been demonstrated about a whole foods plant-based diet, so we're talking about vegan or vegetarian diets, as far as I can tell, may have only to do with the whole foods part rather than the plant-based part. But it's never been tested, so we don't know. But when reputable physicians and nutrition experts recommend a whole foods plant-based diet, they are always careful to use the term whole foods in front of it. How is vegetable oil a whole food? I can't square that circle. If you're recommending a whole foods plant-based diet, and if a whole foods plant-based diet, and it has been shown in multiple randomized controlled trials that a whole foods plant-based diet is superior to a highly processed diet that happens to include animal foods, then you really have to go all the way with your philosophy and not pick and choose which things you think are good and bad about it. So I really believe in whole food principles, regardless of how many plants or animals you're eating. I really think following whole foods principles is key.
Yeah, me too.
And so no matter what else you're doing, get the junk out. And I cannot think of a good reason to include linoleic acid. It's all risk, no benefit. We don't know everything we need to know yet about linoleic acid, but because it's not even essential in the diet, why take that risk?
Yeah. And I think that precautionary principle is always worth following if you can. It hasn't been in our food supply for that long. It seems reasonable to proceed with caution there, whereas something like olive oil has, So there's many rabbit holes we could go down. Thank you for answering that. Let's get back on these 5 foods that you're suggesting people think about cutting out, straight reduce, right? We've done refined carbs, refined oils. Okay, alcohol.
Yes.
What, as a psychiatrist, why do you think that's something we should be careful about?
Well, we often hear that red wine is good for the brain and, can help us, improve our cognitive, prevent dementia, that sort of thing. That it's part of it's definitely a key component of the Mediterranean diet. When you see the Mediterranean diet pattern, if you see an image of it, you will usually see a glass of red wine next to it, right? So it's usually kind of a grain and legume heavy triangle with a glass of red wine next to it. So what is that red wine doing there? Why do we think it's good for us? Well, we think it's good for us. I mean, the origin of that idea comes from what are called observational or epidemiological studies. We could talk a lot about that, which we may not today. But in any case, it basically was an assumption or maybe wishful thinking. When nutrition experts went to the Mediterranean and saw, oh my gosh, people in the Mediterranean seem to be healthier than Americans. I wonder why that might be. Let's look at what they're eating. They seem to be enjoying some red wine with their meals. Maybe that's why. So it was a theory, perhaps even a wish that, red wine would be good for us, right? And so they designed this pattern and they included the red wine in their pattern. They never tested the red wine to see whether or not it was better for people's brain health. It would rather be unethical to design a clinical trial with human beings where you ask them to drink more red wine. And you as a clinician, a fellow clinician, will know how many of your patients come to you complaining of memory problems or depression. And you say, oh my gosh, it must be a wine deficiency. I want you to go home. I want you to drink more red wine. Come back next week. I'm sure you'll be feeling better. Yeah. I'm sure that's the problem. So no, of course not. It's ludicrous. This is a toxic, addictive liquid that causes tremendous amounts of oxidative stress and inflammation in every and can destroy every organ in the body, just like high blood sugar can. So there's no reason on earth to think that red wine would be good for your health. But there have been many, many studies of a molecule extracted from red wine called resveratrol, which is supposed to be kind of a miracle antioxidant that comes from red grapes. This resveratrol has been tested in multiple clinical trials, animal studies, laboratory studies, human clinical trials, trying to see whether or not it can improve brain health and protect the brain against dementia, improve memory, things like that. But none of those studies have shown any benefit. There are many reasons why red wine itself has not been used in clinical trials, not the least of which is that the amount of red wine you would need to consume in one day to reach even the lowest doses of resveratrol used in clinical trials would be 500 bottles a day.
Wow.
There's so little resveratrol in a glass of red. One glass of Pinot Noir has maybe a milligram of resveratrol, and that lonely milligram of resveratrol is swimming in a sea of alcohol, which is a powerful promoter of oxidative stress. We talk all the time about eat more antioxidants, eat more antioxidants. Well, why don't we talk more about eat less pro-oxidants, eat less of the things that are causing the oxidative stress in the first place? If you're drinking a glass of something that promotes oxidative stress and you drop a milligram of resveratrol in it, how effective do you think that's going to be?
That's why the superfood idea is so palatable. And again, I'm not blaming anyone. I get it. No. You know, we like to do things that are easy as humans, right? So it's just an easier sell than, well, maybe if you should cut that out of your diet in the first place.
Who doesn't want to believe that all they have to do to fight off depression or dementia is eat more dark chocolate and drink more red wine? I mean, sign me up, because that, I think that would be a lovely life. And it's fun in the short term, but in the long term, it is tremendously damaging. And the other people who love this idea isn't just us human beings. We like to rationalize all kinds of things, but also the food industry and the wine industry. It works for them. Our confusion about these things works for them, because they can then say, "Oh, I've got this, 32-ounce bottle of fruit juice that contains 32 grams of carbohydrate. Oh, but it's also got these polyphenols in it that are powerful fighters of well, 32 grams of sugar, powerful promoter of oxidative stress, and those polyphenols, good luck absorbing them. Yeah. They do not work in the human body."
And I think we all need to be aware that there's upsides and there's downsides, and take into account them all.
Exactly. So you don't just want half the truth, you want the whole truth, right? So yes, these foods and products contain these molecules. What else do they contain? And what are the risks and benefits of those things? And so, and marketers are genius at this, right? So they're always saying what's not in something. Oh, it doesn't have any cholesterol, or it doesn't have any saturated fat, or it doesn't have whatever it is that, it doesn't have any gluten, or it doesn't, whatever it is. But okay, what does it have? What does it have? And so I want to know everything that's in there. And honestly, the best way for people to avoid falling for this kind of smoke and mirrors tactics is to not eat things that need ingredient labels in the first place. Yeah. Whole foods don't need an ingredient label. Yeah. Any kid can walk up to a stalk of broccoli or an egg or a peach and say, "I know what that is. It's got one ingredient. This is what it is." You can find it in nature. That's a whole food. If it needs an ingredient, if you're starting to read ingredient labels, you're in trouble already, because it's 9 times out of 10 is going to be a processed food that's bad for you.
I just want to highlight another point here, Georgia, if I may, and I'd really appreciate your perspective on this as well. the cost of living is going up in many countries around the world. Okay, so many people feel that it's harder for them to spend money on the things that they ideally would want to spend their money on. Okay. Now, for many years, one of the things that often comes up when talking about whole foods is the expense of eating whole foods, right? And a lot of these ultra-processed foods are cheap. And, you know, you get all these offers on in the supermarkets and the stores in America, right? It's where you can buy one, get one free or whatever it might be. And then some people say we shouldn't be talking about this because certain populations can't implement these changes, even though they may want to because of finances. And I completely accept that that may be true. And there are certain people, I know in the UK, but I've seen, you know, stuff in America about these food deserts where you just can't buy whole foods and they're just full of fast food joints and it's just going to be impossible, right? But at the same time, I think that often causes a fear where we don't actually say the important stuff. And I have worked with poorer populations. And you know what? I'd often go to eggs with those guys. I'd often say, listen, I get it, but you know, do you eat eggs? And often they say yes. I say, you know what? Eggs have actually got a lot of good quality nutrients in that I think will help you. And they can be really, really cheap as well. So the reason I want to bring that up, I'm really passionate about this because I think sometimes now we're so keen to be politically correct in how we communicate. And again, I also am. I don't want to say anything that people find difficult or offensive, right? But at the same time, I think that stops sometimes us communicating what people really need to know and want to know. And there are populations that I've worked with where actually they don't have much, but if you're honest with them and tell them how important you think those whole foods are, often they will make other sacrifices and put those things in if you can guide them in the right way. That's been my experience. What's your experience been there?
Well, I absolutely. I mean, first of all, everybody deserves to know the truth about food and get to make their own decisions based on, you know, their own priorities within their family. But there is absolutely no reason, regardless of your economic situation, to not change your diet and to be healthier. It actually can save you money in the long run if you know which foods are worth spending your money on and which foods are not worth buying in the first place. So my mom, I love bringing up my mom because she's my hero. So my mom is 90 years old. She raised us three girls on a shoestring, single mom, and you know, worked really hard. First as for many years worked in hospital housekeeping department. Eventually became the head of housekeeping in her hospital. And then when she retired, she refused to retire. So now she takes care of developmentally disabled adults in her home, even now at the age of 90.
Oh wow!
And she's still working, right? And she is. She is Bargain Betty. So my mom is a champion coupon clipper. She is extraordinarily frugal. Her favorite thing to do on a weekend is go to a yard sale and then come back and say, guess how much? You know, so she still to this day is on a very limited income and makes the most of it. So my mom eats a low carb diet. My mom doesn't spend any more money on her healthy whole foods diet now than she did when she was eating differently. Why? Because some of the healthiest foods you can buy, especially the animal foods, like you said, eggs, are the least expensive. So you don't need the skinless, boneless chicken breast. You can get the chicken legs or the chicken thighs. You can get a pork shoulder. You can some of the healthiest animal foods you can buy are the least expensive because and they're more nutritious. The dark meat, the fattier cuts, those are actually more nutritious than the fancy, low-fat, skinless things. So there's that. So first of all, you can save a lot of money if you know that. Another thing is that you will save a tremendous amount of money on food because you will eat less. Your appetite will be better regulated. You will find yourself naturally, if you eat the right way, that you only need to eat maybe twice a day, maybe even 3 times a day, but you're not going to find yourself hungry 2 to 3 hours after you eat because your appetite is so much better regulated. And the third reason you're going to save money, you're going to need a lot fewer medications, fewer doctor's visits, fewer surgical procedures, fewer. In the United States, we have co-pays where we spend actually a tremendous amount of money getting health care, even when we have insurance, because you're going to be healthier. And so all of these things are going to save you money in the long run.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's interesting that final point. In the UK, because of our National Health Service, you almost don't feel that benefit in the sense that because no one pays at the point of care. I agree that's a benefit. And it's just interesting to me, for all the benefits of something like a National Health Service, one of the things that is, I've said this, maybe not for a couple of years on this show, but it's almost, you're paying this insurance through your tax that the healthcare, your healthcare will be taken care of. But the healthier you are, the less you're getting value from it.
Right.
Right? So and I'm not blaming people, but if, you end up with type 2 diabetes, you get all the care. You get all the hospital visits, you get all the medications, you don't have to pay for any of it. Whereas perhaps in America, you will feel that, but in the UK, you don't actually feel it, I don't think, in the same way. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. There's no incentive really to be healthy, no financial incentive to be healthier.
Yeah. And again, I don't want that to come across wrong. It's nice that we've got a system that people who are struggling are taken care of.
Yes.
But I think you bringing up your mum was important. I think we both acknowledge that some people do find it very difficult. And as we said, though, we should be sharing, honestly, the information that we think is going to help. Let's get back to these 5, okay? We're on alcohol at the moment, the third one. What is your then advice about alcohol to people or to your patients? Because with all these things, it might be impossible to completely eliminate. So do you feel we get a lot of benefits from just reducing as well? Just taking a quick break to give a shout out to the mental wellness app, Calm. Now, do you ever feel like your brain is on overdrive and your mind is constantly racing? The plans, worries, and to-do lists can often feel never-ending. Well, Calm can help your mind take a break from the noise by softening anxiety symptoms in the moment and helping you cope with day-to-day stressors. Calm is the #1 app for sleep and meditation, giving you the power to calm your mind and change your life. Now, Calm recognizes that everyone faces unique challenges in their daily lives, that mental health needs differ from person to person, and that time for meditation may also vary. And since self-care practices are so deeply personal, Calm strives to provide content that caters to your own individual preferences and needs. Their meditations range from focusing on anxiety and stress, relaxation and focus, to building habits, improving sleep, and taking care of your physical well-being. Stress less, sleep more, and live better with Calm. If you go to calm.com/live more, you'll get a special offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription, and new content is added every week. For listeners of the show, Calm is offering an exclusive offer of 40% off a Calm premium subscription at calm.com/live more. Go to calm.com/live more for 40% off unlimited access to Calm's entire library. That's calm.com/live more. This episode is also brought to you by the 3-Question Journal, the journal that I designed and created in partnership with Intelligent Change. Now, journaling is something that I've been recommending to my patients for years. It can help improve sleep, lead to better decision-making, and reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression. It's also been shown to decrease emotional stress, make it easier to turn new behaviors into long-term habits, and improve our relationships. There are, of course, many different ways to journal, and as with most things, it's important that you find the method that works best for you. One method that you may want to consider is the one that I outline in the 3-question journal. In it, you will find a really simple and structured way of answering the 3 most impactful questions I believe that we can all ask ourselves every morning and every evening. Answering these questions will take you less than 5 minutes, but the practice of answering them regularly will be transformative. Since the journal was published in January, I have received hundreds of messages from people telling me how much it has helped them and how much more in control of their lives they now feel. Now, if you already have a journal or you don't actually want to buy a journal, that is completely fine. I go through in detail all of the questions within the 3-question journal, completely free, on episode 413 of this podcast. But if you are keen to check it out, all you have to do is go to drchatterjee.com/journal or click on the link in your podcast app.
So really, with anything where there's more risk than benefit, it's up to that individual where they want to draw that line. And I think that understanding that it's more risk than benefit, in fact, that it's almost all risk and very little benefit, having that information, I think, is useful for people because they then will not trick themselves into thinking that red wine is good for their health and therefore they should consume some on a regular basis, right? So being honest with people is important. But then beyond that, of course, we're humans and none of us are perfect about our diet, including me. And so we make our own choices under different situations. And we need to do so not just with the right information about the food or the beverage or the substance, but about ourselves. How does it affect me personally? What are the risks for me personally? So some people can't control their intake of alcohol. And so 1 drink becomes 5, becomes 8, and all kinds of health and other kinds of problems can ensue from that. And other people, fortunately like myself, can have 1 drink and walk away. That doesn't make me more virtuous. That's just luck of the draw. The same isn't true for me with refined carbohydrates. If you put me in a room full of muffins, I'm not sure if I would survive. But it's not a holier than thou thing. It's just we're different. And so some people can get away with or enjoy safely with minimal downside, a glass of wine with dinner, right? And others can't. And I think what I encourage people to do, because this book is really written for people with mental health issues, is explore that relationship. Take it out of your diet for 30 days and see if you feel any better and see what it's doing in your life and whether or not you think it's worth it to continue. Just really understand what's going on for you as an individual. Because for some people, they're going to need to take it all the way out. Others are going to need to be more careful with it. And others are going to decide, you know what, this is worth the risk for me. I think this makes my life more enjoyable or more social, whatever it is. People are adults, they can make their own decisions, but I want them to make those decisions in an informed way so that they have all the information they need to make it.
Yeah, I love that. And let's not kid ourselves that half a bottle of red wine each night is helping our brain and our future cognitive health and our heart health.
Exactly.
If you still want to have it, you're entitled to.
Yes.
Right? But let's just be honest with people. Okay. What was 4 and 5? Was it grains and legumes?
Yes.
Or was that one category?
They're so similar we can lump them together.
So that will be covering the 5, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm going to say that I think most people agree about refined carbs. I think you made a really good case for refined oils. And I think there's, a lot of people who would agree with that as well. I think alcohol, most people are in agreement with that actually, once you start increasing your alcohol intake, nothing really good happens to your health, okay? I don't think that's controversial. But moving into grains and legumes, I would argue that for many people, your perspective on this isn't what they're used to hearing.
Correct.
So I'd love you to explain it. Before you do, though, I believe, I don't know if you would agree with this, that if people did the first 3, if they've never reduced those 3 and they make a concerted effort to do that, and your plans at the end of your book will absolutely walk people through how to do that, you're probably going to feel way better than you currently do in all different aspects of your health.
Yes.
That's my belief. That's what I've seen. So first of all, would you agree with that? And secondly, then let's go into grains and legumes and why you are encouraging us to be cautious.
I 100% agree with you that wherever people can make a change in the right direction, please do so. If it's just one of those three things, great, start there. If it's two of those things, even better. If it's three, even better, right? So wherever you're willing to start there. And then see how you do. And if you don't feel better enough, you can move on to the next change. One of the things I do in the book is I give a list of single changes that people can make if they don't feel ready, if they're not really comfortable with the idea of completely restructuring their diet from the ground up, which I think is, of course, what's best. But maybe they're a one-at-a-time person. They just, or maybe they only have it in them right now to make one change. That's great. Please do that. So, yes, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Okay.
That being said, grains and legumes, I know this is a tough one for a lot of people to hear or maybe to understand or wrap their heads around, because we've been told for decades that grains and legumes should form the foundation of a healthy diet. They are the foundation of the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is one of the best studied diets on the planet. We've got lots and lots of what are called randomized controlled trials, which are considered the highest quality of scientific human clinical trial evidence, showing that the Mediterranean diet, time after time after time, outperforms the SAD diet, the standard American diet, for all kinds of health problems. We now even have three randomized controlled trials demonstrating that the Mediterranean, if you give people with moderate to severe depression, clinical depression, you switch them from the SAD diet to the Mediterranean diet, you will see noticeable improvements. Yeah. Something like a third of people, depending on the study you're looking at, will even experience remission from their depression. That's fantastic, right? So the Mediterranean diet is definitely better than the SAD diet for depression. It turns out that there's a diet called the MIND diet, which is a modified version of the Mediterranean diet, which was studied in a 3-year randomized controlled trial for to try to prevent cognitive decline, did not show any benefits. So with cognitive decline, it's a much tougher condition to treat, but clearly for depression, right? But just because the Mediterranean diet is better for depression than the SAD diet does not necessarily mean it's the best diet for depression or for the brain in general. And there are good reasons to believe it's not. And one of the reasons is that its foundation, which are the grains and legumes, are the least nutritious and riskiest whole food you can eat. There are lots of foods in the world. There are, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, eggs, meat, fish, fruits, vegetables, seeds. Of all the whole foods, the riskiest to your health and the least nutritious, the one that I would argue is least worth spending your money on, are the grains and legumes. Why? Because they're very low in nutrients to begin with. So low that most products made with them are fortified with extra nutrients because they don't have enough on their own to be worth eating. Another is that they're mostly starch. There's nothing wrong with starch if your metabolism is healthy. But the growing majority of us now have insulin resistance and can't safely process high carbohydrate diets. So for some people, choosing to base your diet on starch, 40 to 60% starch, metabolically not a good idea. It's going to keep your insulin levels too high. You're not going to be able to lose weight. You're going to develop something called insulin resistance of the brain, which we can talk about later if you want. But lots of risks there metabolically. But then beyond that, grains and legumes they're essentially seeds. So grains are the seeds of grasses. Legumes are the seeds of legumes, beans and peas and lentils. And if you cut open a grain or a bean, a legume, you'll find a tiny embryo inside. That embryo is the future generation of the plant. Those foods, grains and beans, are heavily defended. They're protected by the parent plant. So they're not, these seeds, grains and legumes, they may need to wait for years before the conditions are right to sprout. So they contain naturally defensive toxins to protect the embryo against predators. And they also contain what are called anti-nutrients, which selfishly kind of hold on to the many of the nutrients that are inside those foods, especially minerals and certain vitamins, for the future embryo when it's ready to sprout. So just because these foods appear to contain certain nutrients doesn't necessarily mean that we can access them easily. So even the nutrients they do contain, many of those are not highly available to us. So, and these defensive toxins pose risks to thyroid health, gut health, immune health. These toxins do breach barriers and can aggravate the immune system. Lots of reasons to avoid them, and no good reason I can think of to eat them unless you are choosing a vegan diet. You will really need to include some legumes, some carefully prepared legumes that have been prepared in a way that will reduce their toxicity and improve their digestibility and maybe even reduce their anti-nutrients, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for you to get enough protein.
Yeah. Well, thank you for explaining your perspective there. So grains. One of the reasons you mentioned was because of the metabolic mayhem that can ensue. I think that's a really important point. Again, when we look at these populations around the world who are seemingly living to a ripe old age with minimal health problems, I think we like to overly focus on one area of a multifaceted lifestyle. But also, I think we sometimes forget about the base level state of our population, right? So in many Western countries, certainly in the US now, reports are that is it above 90% of the adult population have some degree of metabolic dysfunction.
Yes.
Okay, so the norm is to be metabolically unhealthy.
Yes.
Therefore, in that population, who are also a lot of the time quite physically inactive, is it a good idea to have a lot of grains that are probably going to spike your blood sugar? I think when you look at it through that lens, even if you don't go anywhere near the anti-nutrients and the absorption of certain things and whether you can absorb them or not, I think there's a strong case there to say some of us need to be careful with that.
Yes.
In agreement?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the metabolic reason for that. But some people are going to be saying, okay, Georgia, I get that, but what about the grains that spike my sugar less? The less refined grains, the more traditional grains, real whole grain, not stuff that's marketed as whole grain, but real whole grains that have a much flatter blood sugar response. What do you say to them?
Those are better choices for your metabolic health. So you are less likely. So when you refine a grain, and there's so much confusion about what a whole grain is, but a whole grain, it's really quite simple. It's the intact kernel. It's got its bran coating, and it looks like a whole grain. As soon as you start chopping it into pieces of any size, it's refined to a certain extent. And if you turn it into flour, it's refined all the way into a powder, right? So the particles, the smaller the particle sizes that you're chopping it into or polishing it down to whatever it is, what you're doing is you're increasing the access to the carbohydrates inside the grain. And if you're powdering it, then now you've got naked glucose molecules, right? So this degree of refinement matters for metabolic health. So if you're metabolically unhealthy, or if you're metabolically healthy and you're trying to protect yourself from becoming metabolically unhealthy, yes, from a metabolic perspective, the closer you get to whole, the safer you are, because that intact bran coating is going to slow the digestion of those carbohydrates, may even make it difficult for you to access them at all in some cases, because it's so hard to digest that bran coating down.
Okay, so that's the grains. And I think the reason I'm pausing on all of these things is because, as you acknowledge, these are the things that people are being told are healthy,
right?
And they should be eating more of. And to be really clear, from what you've just said, you're basically saying that yes, the Mediterranean diet has been shown to have some quite profound benefits over the standard American diet, the standard Western diet.
Right.
But the case you're making is that it's not as good as it could be.
I think we can do a lot better. In fact, every diet that's ever outperformed the standard, lots and lots of diets have outperformed the standard American diet, depending on the study you look at. Whole foods, plant-based diets have been able to do it. Low-calorie diets have been able to do it. Low-fat diets have been able to do it. Ketogenic diets have been able to do it. Lots of diets outperform the standard. Just about any change you make to the standard American diet is going to be an improvement.
Okay.
It's not hard to beat the standard American diet. However, the Mediterranean diet does a better job in a lot of cases than a lot of these other diets do. So I do want to give credit to the Mediterranean diet and to the researchers who have done the hard work of showing that, because it really, with the first randomized controlled trial was in 2017, showed for the first time, it was the first time that any dietary pattern had ever been rigorously tested in the treatment of a diagnosed mental health condition.
That was Felice Jacka's work in the SMILES trial.
The University of Dakin, exactly. So, and she's considered one of the thought leaders in the nutritional psychiatry field. And so this is really important because it shows, it proves dietary quality matters. If you improve the quality of your diet, you can actually, in many cases, improve your mood. That's a big deal. But what if it didn't work for you? Or what if it didn't help you enough? I want people to know there's more they can do.
Okay, and this is key, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this goes back to something I said earlier on in this conversation, which is about what happens as a clinician when you have a sick person in front of you.
Yes.
Okay. Research is all great. It can take you so far, but sometimes, and it's great to get the research to support why what you're doing as a clinician works, but sometimes you have to go further.
Yes.
Okay. So you mentioned grains. I think we have to cover legumes and things like beans, because many people have been told that beans are a superfood. I know you don't like that term, but that populations who eat large amounts of beans, if they're properly prepared and they're soaked beforehand, which I know can help, that these are good for our gut bacteria. If we look at the blue zones, a lot of people will say, Dan Boetner will say, for example, that beans are one of the key foods. So let's just try and tease this out, because I don't think any of this is black or white. And let's take it to an extreme, or not an extreme, but something that's very common these days. Autoimmune disease is on the rise massively. And it is uncanny how many people will tell you, and I know you know this, that their autoimmune disease symptoms have got dramatically better when they go whole food and when they cut out grains. Certainly, for many years, I would see a lot of autoimmune illness, and I was just amazed by how much you could improve things by dramatically changing their diet. And sometimes you had to actually go quite extreme to get those changes.
Yeah.
But I didn't have to with everyone. Sometimes just whole food was enough.
Right.
But with some of them, it's like, yeah, actually, if we cut out all grains, sometimes their joint pains would just vanish.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that nuance is needed and is missing from the discussion around food when people say, oh, they're good for everyone. No, they're not good for everyone. Right. Some people get benefit when they cut them out.
I agree with everything you said. I would add one other layer, which is all the inclusion of, let's stick to legumes, because those are more nutritious than grains. There's no reason for anybody to eat a grain. No nutritional earthly reason to eat a grain. But legumes, you could argue, well, they are the plant food along with nuts that are the highest in protein, right? And so if you're trying to meet your nutritional needs with plant foods, you must include legumes in your diet. Soy in particular tofu is a particularly good example of a plant food that contains all of the amino acids that you need, right? So it's complete protein. So they're really, really important for people who choose to eat that way. That does not mean that legumes are good for people. And in fact, there's no evidence that legumes are good for people. All of the information about these populations eat beans and therefore they are healthier. Whole grains are good for you and they're an important part of a diet. All of that information is theoretical. It's theoretical because when you look at a group of people in a blue zone or wherever you may wish to look, where they seem to be doing better than another group of people, you look at their dietary pattern and you think, that's interesting. They're eating this, that, and the other thing, they're eating some beans. Maybe it's the beans. Maybe it's the beans that makes it healthier. We don't know that. That's a guess. What are they not eating? What are those healthy populations not eating? And if any study you look at that's observational, where they're looking, or nutrition epidemiology, they're looking at a population, they're looking at their dietary pattern writ large and guessing what it is about their diet that makes them healthier. And what the only thing you will find in common with all of these healthier populations is they're not eating junk. They're not eating all the sugars and cereals and vegetable oils and processed foods. That's the only thing they have in common. So we don't know if it's the beans or not. Maybe it is, but that's never been tested. We don't know if it's the whole grains. All the information about whole grains are healthier. There are countless studies of whole grains diets, including whole grains, beating diets, like outperforming other diets that include refined grains. Mm-hmm. We know whole grains are healthier than refined grains. We've got lots and lots of studies there. Do we know that a diet that contains whole grains is healthier than a diet that doesn't contain any grains at all? We don't know that. We are guessing about what's in those diets that's making them healthier. And my money is on what they're not eating as opposed to what they're eating.
Okay, so in terms of then of making sure that everyone listening to this is not confused and is clear, right? Because one of the things I see a lot these days is I think the fact that experts disagree on dietary principles can often get really confusing for the lay public.
Yes.
Oh, I just don't know what to believe.
I know.
Like, I don't know what I should follow then.
Right.
Okay. So I think we've covered this, but just to be crystal clear, I think what you're saying, Georgia, and please jump in if I'm getting anything wrong, you're basically saying, look, you've been a psychiatrist for many, many years. Until you realized the power of food as medicine, you were unable to get people this well.
Right.
Profound. And I know we haven't really covered many case studies today. There's plenty in the book from all kinds of things: depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. It is remarkable, okay? All of us, in your view, would benefit from trying to not be on the standard American diet, the standard Western diet, and make our diet as much as possible whole food based.
Yes.
I don't think that's controversial.
No.
Right? If you're able to do that,
we're on the same page.
Start there. Okay. As well as that, let's make sure we're cutting out as many refined carbs as we can.
Yes.
As many refined oils as we can.
Yes.
Let's try and make sure we're being sensible with our alcohol intake. Yes. Up to there, I think people are going to go, yeah, okay, that makes sense to me. Okay, I'm going to try and do that as much as I can. I think what you're saying is, in your view, the ideal human diet would not even contain whole grains or legumes. However, if you are choosing to be a vegan for a variety of reasons, maybe ethical reasons, environmental reasons, whatever, there's many reasons why people choose that, compassionate reasons, then you're saying actually you're going to need legumes. You're less convinced on whole grains, but I think you're saying maybe whole grains and legumes, maybe, otherwise you're going to struggle. Is that what you said about that?
Yeah, there's no nutritional reason to include the grains for anybody, but the legumes, because they contain essential amino acids, are important to include, yes.
Okay. And then if you are you've got a reason to go for optimal, you've had your own health challenges, which when you change your diet, you got, you saw the incredible benefits, and you've seen it with your patients. Not everyone has the motivation to go that far.
Right.
So are you saying with these final two categories, whole grains and legumes, listen, if you've made changes to your diet, as we've just mentioned, and things have got significantly better, but you're still struggling, perhaps you want to consider a short trial without the whole grains and legumes just to see what happens. Would that be a reasonable summary of the sort of things you're saying?
Absolutely. I really and I try to use this. I try to emphasize this philosophy throughout the book. Is I want people to adopt a curiosity mindset. So meaning that if you're not feeling the way you want, there are lots of changes you can experiment with and explore to see how they affect you personally, right? And so I think it's really important. I can't, if you come to me and you've got depression or anxiety or mood swings or memory problems, whatever it is, I can't tell you exactly which diet is going to be the right one for you or the one that's going to suit your lifestyle best and get you to feel your best. But I can tell you from a biological, using my understanding of the biology of the human body, the biology of the brain, and the biology of food, I can tell you which changes are the ones that make the most sense, the most biological sense to try. And then what you decide to do and what you discover along the way may lead you to different places. But I can tell you which changes make the most sense to consider. And then it's up to you to decide which one of those you want to try. And then when I'm working with patients, I never know where we're going to go. Yeah. And we discover together. I say, well, let's discover together when people say, well, do you think this will help with, my psychosis or my mood swing or whatever it is? I say, well, I don't know. Let's find out together.
Yeah. No, I love that. And, I really do think the book's very, very well written. Part 1 goes through the problems with a lot of nutrition research and the conclusions that we've drawn. So that's a really fascinating part to the book. The end page, I would say sort of part 4 of the book, goes through these dietary strategies in quite a lot of detail, quite a lot of hand-holding for people. Before we finish, Georgia, you have published your own study, haven't you, on the ketogenic diet? And I think it'd be worth just sharing that because, as people know, you're a psychiatrist. You see a lot of sick people with quite severe mental health problems. And you have found, like a former guest on this show, Chris Palmer, that ketogenic diets can have incredible therapeutic benefits for certain people.
Yes. So I use a lot of different nutritional strategies in my work, and I share a lot of that with people in the book. This is not just a book about ketogenic diets for mental health, although the ketogenic diet has become the cornerstone of the work that I do. I work in a very flexible way with people. And I intentionally did not write a book just about ketogenic diets for mental health because I know for lots of people, that's going to be a non-starter. Yeah. They're going to say, you know what, I that's not for me. I don't want to do that. I want people to know there are lots of other changes they can make to improve the brain healthiness of their diet. And I really want everybody to have a seat at the table. And so I include information for people who prefer plant-based diets and or even who prefer carnivore diets, and everything in between, right? So there's something in there for everybody. But, the ketogenic diet is different than other diets because the ketogenic diet energizes the brain differently. So brain metabolism changes profoundly on a ketogenic diet, the whole body actually. It's really as though you are shifting all of your cells to a different operating system. And until you've tried it, people out there who haven't tried it and are wondering what the potential is, if you haven't tried it for yourself to see what's possible, I really encourage you with certain caveats here. You don't just want to jump onto a ketogenic diet. It's a very powerful intervention that can change blood sugar levels, blood pressure levels, medication levels, all kinds of things very quickly. So, you do need some support if you're going to do this. But it's become the cornerstone of my work with patients because I have never seen anything else this powerful in terms of mental health treatment in my 25 years as a psychiatrist. I mean, I've seen a ketogenic diet improve people's sense of well-being, their mood, their behaviors, their emotions, their clarity of thinking, their memory within days to weeks in many cases of starting a ketogenic diet. So a couple of years ago in 2022, I co-authored a study. This was the work of my friend and colleague, Dr. Albert Denat. He's a psychiatrist practicing in Toulouse, France for more than 35 years. Wow. And he's nearing retirement. And he's, and the reason why I get to go around the world and talk about his work is that he's really, he's at the end of his career and, isn't that interested in spreading this information. So I'm really honored to be able to do this. Is that, what he did was he invited 31 of his most treatment-resistant patients with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression to come into the hospital and under his supervision as volunteers to try a ketogenic diet, a whole foods, mildly ketogenic diet under his supervision in the hospital setting to see whether or not it would help them, because these were people who had been ill for an average of 10 years, some as long as 30 years. These are people who were taking, at the time of admission to the hospital, an average of 5 psychiatric medications, not at all unusual in chronic mental illness. And all of these people had at least one marker of poor metabolic health, which again is pretty much the norm in people with chronic mental illness. And they had been hospitalized before in this very same hospital system by this very same psychiatrist and not seen improvement. And so they came into the hospital. 28 of 31 of them were able to stay on the diet for 2 weeks or longer, which is what you need to do to start to see benefits. Every single one of them improved. 43% of them achieved clinical remission from their primary psychiatric diagnosis. 64% of them left the hospital on less psychiatric medication. And all of their metabolic health markers improved, including significant weight loss. Even in people, the majority of these people were taking antipsychotic medications that are notorious for causing stubborn and severe amounts of weight gain.
Wow.
A remarkable, I think really hopeful experience that is helping now to spur more research around the world.
Yeah, amazing that you published that. Well done. And do we know how many of those patients were able to stick to it afterwards?
Yes. So a third of them, when they left the hospital, a third of them, even those were people, with a lot of challenges, opted to stay on a diet pretty close to what they'd been in the hospital. Almost 2/3 of them, when they left the hospital, continued with certain amounts, with certain changes to their diet. They didn't go back to the way they were eating before. So, and the reason why people were trying to stay on a ketogenic diet or close to it when they left the hospital was because they'd never felt that well before.
Yeah. Wow. I think this is a field of research that's going to just increase and increase over the next few years. And it's much needed because, we can all have our own dietary preference, but at the end of the day, if you're sick, you'll do anything that you can to feel better. And that is, again, it's so obvious when you say it like that. But this is why people are doing all kinds of diets around the world and experiencing benefit and trying to share that with people. You see this a lot with the carnivore diets. Some people, when they go carnivore, which for people who don't know is a very meat-heavy diet, they are getting remission of their autoimmune symptoms. Not everyone, but many people are. And so we have to acknowledge that. We need to look at that and go, well, what's going on here? And when when people get quite divisive about this, oh, it's the wrong diet, you shouldn't be doing that. It's like, hey, listen, when you're unwell and you find something that makes you feel good, there's very little that is going to motivate you as much as that.
Absolutely. What do you have to lose? And who doesn't have 6 to 12 weeks to try a different diet to see what's possible for them? And I think one of the things I can really reassure people about is that the reason why, one of the many reasons why I wrote this book, I am tired of people having to accidentally stumble into these interventions, right? The reason why we have to keep reinventing the wheel as physicians, like, oh my gosh, I didn't know this about nutrition. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't understand how brain metabolism worked. I didn't understand, that all the damaging ingredients of the modern diet. The reason why we had to go and study that for ourselves, change our careers, and come and start podcasts to help people understand what to eat is because the information that we've been fed about nutrition for decades has been wrong. It doesn't work. And because it doesn't work, people are left to their own devices to find something that does. So I encourage people to experiment and just let go of what they think they know about nutrition and replace some of that information with biology and with curiosity and hope.
Well, Georgia, I really appreciate the work that you're doing. It's clearly helping so many people, not only your patients, but now through the writing of this book, many, many people around the world. The book is Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind, a powerful plan to improve moods, overcome anxiety, and protect memory for a lifetime of optimal health. Thanks for coming to the studio.
Thank you very much for having me, Rangan. It's been a pleasure.
Really hope you enjoyed that conversation. Do think about one thing that you can take away and apply into your own life. And also have a think about one thing from this conversation that you can teach to somebody else. Remember, when you teach someone, it not only helps them, it also helps you learn and retain the information. Now, before you go, just wanted to let you know about Friday 5. It's my free weekly email containing 5 simple ideas to improve your health and happiness. In that email, I share exclusive insights that I do not share anywhere else, including health advice, how to manage your time better, interesting articles or videos that I've been consuming, and quotes that have caused me to stop and reflect. And I have to say, in a world of endless emails, it really is delightful that many of you tell me it is one of the only weekly emails that you actively look forward to receiving. So if that sounds like something you would like to receive each and every Friday, you can sign up for free at drchatterjee.com/Friday5. Now, if you are new to my podcast, you may be interested to know that I have written 5 books that have been bestsellers all over the world, covering all kinds of different topics: happiness, food, stress, sleep, behavior change and movement, weight loss, and so much more. So please do take a moment to check them out. They are all available as paperbacks, ebooks, and as audiobooks, which I am narrating. If you enjoyed today's episode, it is always appreciated if you can take a moment to share the podcast with your friends and family, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful week. And always remember, you are the architect of your own health. Making lifestyle changes always worth it, because when you feel better, you live more.